Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, good.
Well, welcome everybody back. Hopefully you're able to get lunch and attend to whatever you needed to attend to. We're honored and it's been a wonderful conference so far. We're so grateful for those that have already spoke to us, and hopefully you can see the themes just building on each other. We're also privileged and want to thank our sponsors. This is the Family Matters Conference presented by Call to Action Philanthropies. And if we could, we have a representative of them, Michaela Pratt. If she could stand up, let's give her a round of applause for making this possible for us. And we're grateful that Philanthropies for doing that. We also will introduce Kristen. Just so you're oriented, we have this 50-minute talk, and then, I'm sorry, I threw her off too when I said that. This is a 1 hour and 20-minute talk. Then after we have a breakout, so we'll have the National Association of Social Workers, Utah Board is here, and they'll be speaking in the Whiting Room. It'll be a panel, and we're honored to have them. We'll also have a second lecture here with Kristen Neff, and you're welcome to attend either, so just so you're oriented for that. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Kristen Neff. She is an insight meditation practitioner, an associate professor of educational psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and Harvard Business Review, among others. And her TED Talk has been viewed over 1.7 million times. I'm guessing that's gone up since this was published. She's also the co-developer of an empirically supported training program called Mindful Self-Compassion, which is taught by thousands of people worldwide, and the co-author, which some of you have a book now of hers, of the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, as well as teaching the Mindful Self-Compassion program. And you actually have her latest book that just came out that was being sold as well, which was fantastic. She, as well as teaching Mindful Self-Compassion program, a guide for professionals. She's also the co-founder of the nonprofit Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. We're grateful she's here with us, and please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I love especially talking to people doing good work in the world. I know you're students, but a lot of you are interested in early childhood education and helping others. So to the extent that self-compassion can help you do your good work in the world, it's very gratifying for me. So what is self-compassion? Oh, actually, self-compassion is forgetting to bring out your pointer and then remembering. So before I start, hold on 1 second. I knew I was forgetting something. I got it. Okay. Self-compassion is anyway, I can make do. Actually, it's kind of, I need my little, I know it's too complicated. I'll just do this. It's fine. I'm close enough. So this is a really good example. So what is compassion? What does the word compassion mean? What does passion mean in the Latin? Suffering, the passion of Christ, right? Suffering. Com means with. So compassion means how do we show up for those difficult times, whether it's like major suffering or whether it's something minor going wrong, like, forgetting to have your clicker to advance your PowerPoint slides. How do you show up for that moment? Do you show up in a kind, compassionate, supportive way, either to others or yourself? Or do you show up, I could have said, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that. I'm a horrible person, would have screwed up, something like that. That would not be self-compassionate. So when times are difficult, again, whether that difficulty stems from making a mistake, feeling badly about yourself, or just life becomes really challenging in some way, can we show up for ourselves with warmth, kindness, and support? Now, normally when we think of compassion, we just think of compassion for others. And so self-compassion is a very humble agenda. All it means is we include ourselves in the circle of compassion. We show up for ourselves in addition to showing up for others. And I found this out through my personal life. So I've been researching self-compassion for over 20 years now. But I first found out about it on my last year of graduate school at UC Berkeley. And it was a really difficult time of my life. I had gotten married young, and I got divorced young. And I was feeling like an utter failure. I just never thought that I would get divorced. And here I was in graduate school divorced. And I was also stressed because I was about to get my PhD and I had no job prospects. The job market was really tight, and I thought, oh great, I'm going to be overqualified for a job now. So I had heard that mindfulness meditation was good for stress. So, and I was going to school in Berkeley, and there was meditation groups everywhere. So I learned mindfulness meditation. And fortunately for me, the person leading the particular group I went to talked about self-compassion. The very first night I went. It took me a while to learn how to meditate. It was a little more complex. But almost immediately she said, the woman leading the course said, you need to turn compassion inward as well as outward. You need to be kind to yourself as well as others. So I went home that very night, and I remember this very clearly. I went home and I tried it. I said, okay, Kristen, you're feeling badly about yourself. Well, a lot of people get divorced, What would I say to a friend who this had happened to? Well, you did your best, it happens, I'm here for you. Yes, you're stressed about getting a job, but you'll get through it. So in other words, instead of blaming myself or shaming myself for my situation or just stressing out about it, I actually supported myself. And the moment I did that, it made a difference. Like I didn't have to wait until the next day for it to make a difference. The moment when the stress and the discomfort arose, I kind of held myself, I supported myself, I had my own back, and it became easier to bear. And so that's really the simple way of thinking of what self-compassion is. So if you want to talk about what self-compassion is in very easy terms, this could be for kids or your friends, the really simple way to think about it is treating yourself with the same kindness, support, care, and concern when you struggle that you would naturally treat a good friend you cared about. And I actually invite you all, just for a moment, maybe do a little thought reflection, and think about how do you show up for your friends when they struggle. Maybe you have a friend who's struggling, maybe just failed an exam or having some other challenge in their life or is feeling badly about themselves. How do you normally show up for your friends? What types of things do you say? What's your tone of voice? What's your body posture? Do you maybe put your hand around their shoulder, do something kind of physically comforting? Right, so just kind of think about that. And then now really think about how do you show up for yourself when you struggle, when you make a mistake or you're feeling stressed or there's some big challenge in your life. What types of things do you say to yourself? What's your internal tone of voice? What do you do with your body? Right. And please raise your hand if there's any difference between how you show up for your friends and how you show up for yourself. All right. This is what our research shows. Actually, most people are significantly kinder, more compassionate, more supportive to other people they care about than to themselves. So, I'll talk in a moment about why that's the case. But so self-compassion is really simple. It's just you doing this U-turn and including yourself as someone who's worthy of receiving compassion. Okay, so what happened though is I did get a job. I got a job at the University of Texas at Austin, and I decided I wanted to research self-compassion. So I certainly didn't come up with the idea. But, at that point, at least in academia, no one had really done any empirical research to test, is it true that showing up for yourself in a kind way is going to make things better? So actually, what I did is I created a scale to measure it. And in order to do that, I had to think about, well, what are the elements that go into self-compassion? And I realized it was more than just kindness, right? It was more than just being, nice to yourself. The two other elements had to be there. One is a mindfulness, the ability to be mindful in moments of struggle or suffering or pain. And then also a sense of connectedness to others. So let me guide you through each of these. So it's not an accident that I learned about self-compassion while I was learning mindfulness meditation. So mindfulness, and most of you probably know, is the ability to be present with what's happening as it's happening, right? Instead of ignoring it, pretending it's not there, or instead of getting lost in it, like we become so blended with the negative thoughts and emotions we're having that we can't see straight. So mindfulness means we give a little space. Oh, I see, this is happening, this is difficult. You need to be able to do that in order to give yourself compassion. We can use the example of a friend. If your friend calls you, who's upset, and you don't take her call or his call, you aren't going to be able to give them compassion. We often do that to ourselves. We don't take our own call, right? We're stressed, or we're feeling badly about something, or we're agitated, or maybe we're burned out. We just ignore ourselves. We just soldier on. So we can't support ourselves if we don't stop to realize, hey, I'm struggling, I need a little bit of support here. On the other hand, if we get lost in the drama of what's happening, we become blended with it, there's no space, the space we need to step outside of ourselves and say, you're having a hard time, how can I help? So we need the balanced stance of mindfulness in order to be able to give ourselves warmth and support. Right? And then the warmth and support is the second element of self-kindness. And also, it's interesting, in the field of psychology, they don't actually define compassion as an emotion. Compassion is defined as a motivation, and in particular, is defined as the motivation to alleviate suffering, the desire to help in some way. So if you take a brain scan of someone who's experiencing compassion, the motor cortex is activated. So there's this desire to do something to help in some way. And so the same thing with self-compassion. We notice we're struggling or we're hurting in some way, and we want to help. And then the third element, I was trying to think of what goes into this so I can make my scale. The third element isn't totally intuitive, but I was really taken by this question. What's the difference between self-compassion and self-pity? Because I knew that self-pity, just feeling sorry for yourself, like wallowing, isn't helpful. And I realized that it's the same difference between compassion and pity. Why do we like it when people have compassion for us, but we don't like it when they pity us? Well, pity, there's a sense of separation. I feel sorry for you. It feels uncomfortable. Compassion is, hey, I've been there. We're in this together. The exact same thing with self-compassion. We need to remember that everyone's imperfect. It's not just us. Actually, even though the word self is in self-compassion, usually the self is the one who feels inadequate and is suffering. When we move into the compassion part, there's not a lot of self there, right? Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone struggles. We aren't alone. This is a fallacy of the mind. It seems like everyone else is living a normal, perfect life, and it's just me who's messed up, or just me who's going through this hard time, even though logically we know that's not the case. To be human does not mean to be perfect. To be human means to be imperfect. This is something we all share. And so when we give ourselves compassion, we kind of expand our sense of self. We feel connected to others, and we feel less alone. To be clear, it's not to say that all suffering is the same or the same amount. I mean, there are people in war zones right now, okay? So there are very real differences in amounts and types of suffering. But what it does mean, this is really important, you do not have to earn the right to compassion. You don't have to get a graduate degree to have compassion. Compassion is intrinsic to our humanity. Okay, so you might say compassion is a human right, which is great because it's always available. It comes along with being a human being who struggles on this planet. Okay, there are also two main expressions of compassion that I like to call the tender and the fierce. So tender self-compassion is the nurturing aspect of compassion. It's the accepting side of compassion. I've got this picture of a father with his newborn baby, and hopefully, even though that baby's crying and screaming, a loving parent, accepts their child just as they are, poopy diapers and all, right? And so what hopefully a parent does is soothes that child who's upset, comforts that child, lets that child know, I accept you as you are, I'm here for you, I love you, and then that child starts to calm down. Well, this is partly how self-compassion works, right? Our own version of poopy diapers as adults, right? We make a mistake, or we do something wrong, or something really difficult happens. We say, hey, this happens. It's okay. It's okay to be imperfect. We're here for ourselves. We care for ourselves. We accept ourselves, flaws and all. And we start to calm down. We start to heal. However, compassion, sometimes we need to be accepting, but sometimes it's not compassionate to accept things. For instance, if we are engaged in a behavior that's harmful to ourselves and others, that's not compassionate to accept that. Or if we're in a relationship that's toxic or a work environment that's unjust, it's actually not compassionate to accept things. Sometimes to have compassion, we need to change. And that's what I like to call fierce self-compassion. So yeah, Brad left off that book that just came out a couple years ago called Fierce Self-Compassion, which is the action-oriented, more powerful dimension of compassion. It means, for instance, saying no, drawing boundaries, speaking up. This is not fair, this is not okay. That's an act of compassion. Protecting ourselves is an act of compassion. Caring for ourselves by saying, other people are not going to harm me, for instance. Or instead of saying yes to everything people ask of us, saying, well, actually, I would love to help, but I can't. I need to care for myself right now. That's part of fierce self-compassion. I'm also providing for our needs. Instead of just giving and giving and giving, saying, hey, my needs count too. I need to spend at least some of my precious time and energy on myself. Again, not instead of others, but in addition to others. And then finally, motivating change. Again, it's not compassionate if we're engaged in behaviors or in situations that don't make us happy or that make us unhappy. So making those changes is part of fierce self-compassion. And someone made this graphic for me, which I love. You might think of it as Mama Bear and Mama Bear. By the way, it doesn't matter your gender, if you have kids, these are universal energies like yin and yang, which is kind of expresses the universal energy of this. So the yin side is about accepting the pain of life, accepting the imperfection of ourselves and our lives. The yang is about trying to do something about it, at least as much as we can. And they need to be balanced, because if we're too accepting and we don't take action, we might be complacent, and that's not compassionate. On the other hand, if we're too much about action, 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 and we never our best is never good enough, then we're going to become stressed and exhausted. So that sweet spot, the balance spot, is really where we want to try to be. There's something interesting, however, in terms of how we're socialized, at least in the United States, but in many cultures of the world. If you look at gender role socialization, one of the downsides of kind of raising boys to be a certain type of man and little girls to be a certain type of woman is that if you look at gender role socialization, it actually interferes with the ability of us to be balanced, right? So unfortunately, a lot of boys, when they're young, if they show any tenderness, express any tender feelings, sometimes they get bullied. And this is a problem because this can actually suppress emotional intelligence among boys when they grow up to be men. So if I were to be teaching a paid workshop, 85% of the people would be women, just because it's it's not considered part of the traditional male gender role. And this is a problem in terms of seeking help, if we've got mental distress. If you don't have the ability to show up for yourself because of gender role socialization, that harms boys and men. On the other hand, sometimes people raised as women aren't allowed to be fierce. They're supposed to say yes to everyone. We don't like it when women say no or, get angry, right? Oh, no, that's not okay. And so that could, for instance, if you look at why women are less likely to negotiate a pay raise, because, people don't like really assertive women. So just to kind of put your awareness on the fact that what self-compassion does is it allows us to be authentic. Whatever society tells us, we all have both a fierce and a tender side. And when our sense of approval and worth comes from the inside, not from the outside, we can be our authentic self. All right, so even though I did just show you a picture of bears, there is a lot of research supporting this. This graph is already out of date because it's the end of last year. So there are well over 7,000 studies at this point examining the impact of self-compassion on health. And a friend of mine said, the research is getting pretty boring because we get the same thing over and over again, which is that self-compassion is strongly linked to well-being. So one of the things we get when we give ourselves compassion, again, when we're struggling, when we're suffering, when we have difficult thoughts and feelings, is reductions in negative states of mind, unhealthy states of mind, things like anxiety, depression, stress, post-traumatic stress syndrome, or in the worst case, suicidal ideation. So in other words, when the pain arises and we aren't there for ourselves, and instead we just shame ourselves and kick ourselves when we're down, we're just going to make things worse. And so self-compassion provides a buffer by allowing us to be there for ourselves when times are difficult so that we don't enter that negative spiral. And I kind of expected this when I first started doing research. What was a little more surprising to me is that even though, by definition, if you look at my scale, all the items are, what do you do when you're feeling badly about yourself or you make a mistake? People who are more self-compassionate are happier. They're more optimistic, they're more satisfied with their lives. And that's because if you think about it, compassion is a positive emotion. It feels good when we're connected to others. It feels good when our hearts are warm with kindness. It feels good when we're present. So it's almost like magic. It feels like magic because what happens, let's say you have the SAT, I can't believe let's say failed a test. Okay, failed a test. So one maybe habitual way of doing it would be saying, oh, I'm such an idiot, I hate myself. Okay, and then down you go into depression or anxiety. So with compassion, what it does is you step in, you say, oh man, I can't believe I failed that test. Well, it happens. How can I help myself do better next time? Kind of like you'd be like a friend to say you aren't the only one. And then all of a sudden you move from being locked into the suffering, which is the failure, and you move into the compassionate presence, this holding the pain. And that shift is actually one that leads to other positive emotions like happiness. And again, there's a lot of research supporting this. There's also research that shows, and this is a little more recent, that self-compassion is strongly linked to physical health as well. Because, of course, mind and body are connected, especially through the nervous system. So what we know is that when we lack self-compassion, we're really hard on ourselves, we're usually in sympathetic nervous system response. And so when we give ourselves compassion, we kind of calm and soothe ourselves, it lowers cortisol, for instance, and inflammation. It's also linked to parasympathetic response, things like heart rate variability, which allows us to be more flexible in stressful situations. Our immune system functions better, we sleep better, and then the end result is we have better physical health. There's also been a lot of research looking at the difference between self-compassion and self-esteem. And actually, the very first article I wrote on self-compassion for academia was self-compassion, a healthier alternative to self-esteem. And the TED Talk, some of you may have seen my TED Talk, it's all about this difference. And I was really interested in this difference, partly because I had done 2 years of postdoctoral study after getting my PhD with one of the country's leading self-esteem researchers. And while working for her, I kind of discovered all the downsides of self-esteem. So first of all, what do I mean by self-esteem? Self-esteem, estimation or judgment of worth, right? And so it's not a bad thing to have high self-esteem to feel you're a worthy person. The problem is, how do you get it? What's that judgment based on? So often the judgment is based on feeling special and above average. If you come up after this talk and you say, oh, Kristen, your talk was average, I'll admit it, I'm going to be deflated, right? It's not okay to be average, which means there's always this sense of a social comparison. How am I better than this person? Or, she's more successful, or he's, doing stronger, or whatever. Those types of social comparisons can lead to nasty things like prejudice, for instance. Prejudice has to do with a lot of things, including power and resources, but partly it's this feeling of my group is somehow better than yours. This is partly how I get my self-esteem. Bullying We know one of the reasons little kids start to bully is because they don't have a lot to base their self-esteem on. And so they feel, if I pick on that kid over there, then maybe I will feel good about myself in comparison. So social comparison can be nasty. It can lead to narcissism. You know, some people who just can't take any criticism because they're so invested in feeling superior. The biggest problem with self-esteem is that it's contingent. It depends. It depends on success. We have it when we're succeeding, and it deserts us when we're failing. So you might say self-esteem is a fair weather friend. It's only there for us in the good times. Self-compassion, on the other hand, is a true friend. It's a constant friend. It's a stable friend. So research shows we don't need to feel better than others to have self-compassion. We just have to be a flawed human being like everyone else. You know, we don't have to be narcissistic. We can admit mistakes. And when we fail, that's precisely where self-compassion steps in and says, it's okay. Everyone fails sometimes. You can just try again. So a lot of research supporting this difference. Okay, you may be wondering, you know, why is it that people have less compassion for themselves than others? It seems to be very common. We find it all over the world, and that's probably because evolution likely has something to do with it. So what we know is that when we feel personally threatened, and let's face it, when you fail, when you make a mistake, or something very stressful is happening in your life, we feel threatened. It's natural to feel threatened. So when we feel threatened, we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. But of course, the threat is kind of like often us because we have the problem, so we turn that inward. And so we fight ourselves with criticism. When we criticize ourselves, there's a part of us that thinks, if I get myself in line and I stop myself from making mistakes again, I'll be safe. It's kind of actually coming from a good motive, even though it doesn't necessarily help. We're trying to stay safe by beating ourselves up with self-criticism, or we flee into shame, which evolutionarily was the idea of like, I don't want the other people to beat me up or criticize me, so I'm going to isolate myself. Or we freeze and we get stuck like a deer in the headlights. All these are very natural reactions when we feel threatened. When your good friend is struggling in some way, you don't feel so personally threatened. So you usually don't go into fight, flight, or freeze. Instead, you go into another system that's also very natural, called the mammalian caregiving system. So it also, it is the case that it's natural for us to want to care for others, to care for our offspring, to care for in-group members, usually not out-group members, but at least people in our community or our tribe. And so the feelings of a connectedness, of closeness, of wanting to help are also natural, but they tend to evolve for others, not ourselves. So we're kind of doing a little hack with self-compassion. And that's why if you try it, and I hope you will, it's going to feel a little bit unnatural, because to your body, it is a little unnatural. So we're tapping into the system that evolved to care for others, and we're using it with ourselves. Okay. And if that wasn't bad enough, so not only is evolution stacked against us, our culture is stacked against us. I'm kind of curious. Now, I know we have some younger people here, so maybe things have changed, but how many of you were raised thinking that it was a really good idea to be self-compassionate? Okay, some of you may have therapists, parents, you know, but it's not part of our culture. Right? So our culture doesn't tell us this. Our culture has all these fears and kind of misgivings about self-compassion. Like I often get the question, can you be too self-compassionate? And I know when people are thinking about that, some of these misgivings or really misperceptions are coming up. And they are misperceptions because they've all been disproven by research. So what are some of the blocks? One is the belief it's weak. Right? We kind of, and that's because we think of, I think, self-compassion only in its tender form, and we think it's going to be weak, that we need to be tough as nails. If we're soft with ourselves, we're going to make ourselves weak and vulnerable. It's the exact opposite. So research shows that practicing being supportive to yourself, having your own back, is one of the most powerful sources of strength, coping, and resilience we have available to us. So a lot of research looking at people, going through natural disasters or COVID, people who are more self-compassionate got through COVID with more strength and resilience. A lot of research actually with combat soldiers. And the Veterans Administration is very interested in self-compassion. So combat soldiers who are self-compassionate about all the trauma they face, especially those who are actually in battle, they're more able to function in their daily life. They're less likely to develop PTSD. They're less likely to abuse alcohol because, again, it gives you a way to support yourself in those tough times. If you shame and blame yourself, you're just you're like kneecapping yourself. You're just making it worse. It weakens you. It doesn't strengthen you. This is another one. People think that self-compassion just means being nice to yourself. Yeah, well, that donut's looking pretty good, right? Just self-indulgence. So what does self-indulgence mean? It means giving yourself short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term harm. And if you care about yourself, you aren't going to do it, right? If you care about yourself, you aren't. Maybe occasionally, taking a bubble bath or even having a donut's fine. But if you do it to the point where it starts harming you, it's no longer self-compassionate. And self-compassionate people don't do it. They're much more likely to engage in health behaviors like eating well, exercise, going to the doctor, etc. Another big one is that it's selfish. Right? We're kind of taught to be self-sacrificing, to always put other people's needs ahead of our own. And it's almost as if there's this sense that it's a zero-sum game. We only have 5 units of compassion. So if I give 3 to myself, I'm only going to have 2 left over for anyone else. I should give it all away. It doesn't work that way. The research shows very clearly the more compassion flows inward, the more resources we have available to give to others. So, for instance, research shows that people who are self-compassionate make better relationship partners, whether it's romantic relationships or friendships or family members. Again, if you resource yourself, if you have your own back, then you're going to have more ability to give to others. Especially, this is important, to give to others without burning out. It's like breathing. If you just breathe out and don't breathe in, you aren't going to last for very long. Same thing with compassion. If we just give and we give and we give and we don't give to ourselves, we're going to become drained and depleted. So the research shows, and I'll be talking about this in a little bit more closely, that it's really good for caregivers and it helps them sustain the good work they do. But this we find around the world, very interesting. The number 1 block to self-compassion is the belief that it's going to undermine your motivation. And I've got this picture of, Grandpa Simpson, motivation, that's a paddling. It used to be, actually kind of the conventional wisdom in parenting, that spare the rod, spoil the child. People thought you needed harsh discipline, cruel, really coldness in order to motivate a child so they wouldn't be spoiled. And now we know, that kind of authoritative parenting, in other words, clear boundaries and firmness and structure, but coming from a place of love, of encouragement, of belief and so on, that's going to be a lot more effective motivator. And actually this idea of how we treat a young person is a very good one. So first of all, I have to say, self-criticism does work as a motivator. I'm going to be honest with you. Many people get through law school or med school or other difficult, exam times through harsh criticism. But it works through fear. Okay. So for instance, let's imagine that there's a young student who gets an F on their exam grade, and the teacher wants to motivate that child with harsh criticism, saying, you better get your grades up next time or else you're going to have all these consequences, and the child thinks the teacher's going to hate me. Yeah, well, that child might work a little harder next time, so it kind of works. But it also creates a lot of unintended consequences, like fear of failure. Well, maybe I'm just not good at this. Maybe I should just give up. Performance anxiety. So when you're taking that test, not only are you focusing, but you're thinking, what if I fail? What's it going to mean? Think of all the athletes lately who've talked about all the pressure. If you're afraid of failure, and if you know that the consequences are so great, you can slam yourself if you fail, it's going to make you harder to focus. So it actually, and shame, of course, if you want to encourage your friend to do better next time, would you really say you're a stupid idiot, you can't do it? Of course not. That's going to deflate them like a pop balloon. And yet somehow we think it's going to help ourselves. It really doesn't. So it helps, it works kind of, but much more effective, and there's a lot of research on this, is self-compassion. So first of all, your standards are just as high when you have self-compassion. If you care about yourself, just like if you care about your child, you're going to want to reach your full potential. Of course you do. The whole difference is, what happens when you fall a little bit short? Do you shame yourself? Do you say, oh, I must be a failure because I didn't reach that goal? Or do you say, okay, yeah, so maybe I failed, but it doesn't mean that I am a failure. Okay, I failed. What can I learn from this? You know, it's a truism. Failure is our best teacher, and yet somehow we kind of don't remember that, and we think if we fail that we are a failure. No, it's a great opportunity to learn. And study after study shows that with self-compassion, when you accept, okay, this hurts, I don't like failing. You know, imagine that student who got the F grade, if the teacher said, hey, it's okay, it happens to everyone, but I know you can do better. I believe in you, and this is really key. How can I help you? How can I support you? That's going to be the most effective motivator, and the same thing with ourselves. So just to give an example of the type of study we do on this, I just actually published this last year. We taught NCAA athletes self-compassion. Right? We taught them how to imagine like being a good, supportive coach to themselves. So not only did it increase their self-compassion level, and it also increased their mental health, but it improved their athletic performance. So again, when they had a mistake in their training routine where they lost the game, instead of thinking, you know, that means I'm horrible, I'm not a good athlete, they said, okay, what can I learn from this? And that encouragement actually did help them increase their performance. So it works. Again, you don't have to believe me, a lot of research to show this. And so another question is, why are some people more self-compassionate than others? Because there is individual variation. You know, what are the things that go into, besides evolution, which affects everyone, and culture, which affects everyone, but there are also personal history factors that impact whether or not we're self-compassionate. And I know a lot of the people here are interested in early childhood development, and so it's probably not going to surprise you that early family influences have a pretty big impact on how self-compassionate people are as adults. So if your parents and caregivers treat you like you are a worthy person, you know, worthy of getting your needs met, treat you consistently with compassion, fairness, kindness, and support, you're more likely to internalize that and treat yourself that way as an adult. If your caregivers were very either critical of you, then you're more likely to internalize this. Or maybe they weren't critical of you, but very self-critical, like when you observe them be very self-critical, then you're more likely to internalize that as the best way to be with yourself. And the people who struggle a lot with self-compassion are people with an abuse history. Because unfortunately what happens in this case is, you know, the care system is supposed to make us feel safe and protected. When instead the care system gets mixed with the threat system because our caregivers were abusive in some way, what can happen is actually it can be even scary to give ourselves compassion because it kind of triggers the programming of what happened to us as young people, the trauma memories. So that's, you might say, the bad news. It's harder to be self-compassionate, especially with a lot of trauma in your background. The good news, though, is that permanent? No. So can self-compassion be taught even with people with abuse histories? Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of research that shows that this is a skill that can be learned. Yeah, it's maybe not natural, maybe it didn't come to us easily, maybe we got a raw deal growing up. But if we choose to open our hearts to ourselves and learn this new way of being, we actually can change the way we relate to ourselves. So therapy, for instance, what we know from therapy, in some ways, all therapy, no matter what type of therapy, whether you're a psychoanalyst or you do cognitive behavioral therapy, or almost doesn't matter, the research shows that one of the outcomes of good therapy is self-compassion. Right? The therapist kind of models understanding and compassion for the client's difficulties, kind of models how you might speak about it in a warm, supportive way. The client internalizes that and becomes more self-compassionate. And so that's, in general, all therapy is one way to increase self-compassion. But in case you're interested, there are two forms of therapy that I would say at least have the most research in terms of increasing self-compassion. There's something called compassion-focused therapy developed by Paul Gilbert in the UK that's specifically designed for people with trauma histories, for people for whom practicing self-compassion is scary because it triggers difficult childhood memories. They figured out whole ways to deal with that they call it fear of self-compassion, in a way that's proven to be very effective. And then also internal family systems therapy. Some of you may have heard of it. It's basically part psychology, where it's interesting, you might call it selves compassion, that we identify different parts of ourselves. Sometimes they don't feel exactly the same way. And we give every part of ourselves compassion and understanding and validation, and that also increases self-compassion. But all therapy is one way to do it. And then there's the program that Chris Germer and I developed. Chris Germer is a colleague who's a therapist, and about over 10 years ago we developed something called the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, which isn't therapy. This is designed to be a skill set that you learn in groups, or we've written several books with the skills. So it's a non-clinical way to build the resource of self-compassion. In other words, we don't process old wounds in the program. We teach skills that can be used for any situation. And so we do teach meditation as part of the skill set. We also teach a lot of daily life skills, things you can do. And by the way, I'm going to teach you a couple skills in just a moment, so you'll get a taste of these. And our research shows it doesn't matter whether you learn this through meditation or just in the moment. When you have that difficult thought and feeling, you say something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. What do you need?" That can be enough. Actually, a study just came out of UC Berkeley that showed 20 seconds of self-compassion when you're struggling, maybe putting your hand on your heart or supporting yourself in some way and saying something kind like a friend. 20 seconds a day is enough to build the habit of self-compassion. So it doesn't take a lot of work. Okay, so that's this program. And so what are some of the basic principles of teaching self-compassion? So we've written a whole book called Teaching the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, and it's complex, but just some of the key takeaways. First of all, if you're someone who believes in self-compassion and you want to help other people learn it, there's nothing special about the word self-compassion. For some people, it triggers them. They just can't relate to it. So, for instance, those athletes, those NCAA athletes we taught self-compassion, we never use the word. We called it inner strength training. You don't have to call it self-compassion if that's going to be a problem for people. You can call it inner strength training, inner resilience, etc. Another important point is that to embody self-compassion, so to model it for other people. And when you think about embodying self-compassion, I like to use 3 different words other than kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. It's loving, connected presence. Same 3 components, but it's more evocative. When you embody loving, connected presence with anyone you're trying to teach self-compassion to, they're going to model that directly. You can also model it out loud. So, for instance, maybe you make a mistake, like forgetting something or dropping something. If you actually say, I can use this as an opportunity to model out loud, instead of saying, I'm such an idiot, please feel sorry for me, you actually say, you kind of model acknowledging the pain. That's really sad, or that's upsetting. It's part of life. I'm not alone. It happens. And then words of kindness and support, or perhaps growth and what I can learn from this situation. So modeling out loud is very important. There's research, again, that shows if you do this out loud, other people start being more self-compassionate. The thing about treating yourself as a good friend is really useful, especially for younger people, but really anyone. Like, would you say that to a friend? What would you say to a friend? Well, why don't you try that out? It might be more effective. Sometimes we like to say that the quintessential self-compassion question is, what do I need? Because normally people aren't thinking about what they need. They're just thinking about getting the job done. So you can ask someone, what do you think you need right now? And just asking the question of yourself is an act of self-compassion and may get people to think what would be helpful. And then finally, provide resources. Just to say, I've created a website, selfcompassion.org. I've got a ton of free stuff on there, free meditations, free exercises. You can take the self-compassion test. So those are some tips if you're interested in sharing this. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to do a couple self-compassion practices. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about, in particular, self-compassion for caregivers, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, so what I want to teach you is two of the most popular and portable and actually well-researched practices from the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, which you can do. The first one is called soothing touch. So because we know that self-compassion works through the nervous system, we know that touch is the main way that, think about babies when they're held in their parent's arm. Before they understand what the parents say, they feel the parent's touch as a signal of care and safety. So touch activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It can be a direct way to give yourself compassion. Maybe your mind can't go there. Maybe it's too full of the story of how horrible you are, how horrible the situation is. But if you give your body supportive, kind, warm touch, you actually change your physiology, and that in and of itself can help. So hopefully you're all done eating. I'd like you to just follow along with me and see if you can just get a sense of how you might use touch. You could do this, in the middle of your day, whenever something difficult happens, or just when you take a bathroom break or something like that. Let's try this touch here, where you put one hand over the other, and put both hands over the center of your chest like that. And just notice how that feels. Does it feel supportive? Do you feel like you're holding yourself, like you got yourself, you're there for yourself? And so this is a very common type of self-compassion touch people use. Some people, however, find this makes them feel a little too vulnerable. So a variation of this touch that we like to call love with strength is if we take a fist, not a tight fist, but a fist kind of representing like being resolute, strong, determined, and put that fist over your heart, and then the other hand over it. You might use this touch if you're about to do something very difficult. You notice how that feels? Another good touch that works for a lot of people is cradling your own face. We often do this when we're upset anyway, like think of Home Alone. Right, but try that intentionally as a way to just hold yourself, just like you were a little child, like, oh, this is so hard. Right, that works for some people. You can try giving yourself a hug. We're all going to do it together. It's touchy-feely, but remember there's data that backs this up. So try giving yourself a little hug. This is good for especially the real difficult stuff when it comes up. You can even try rocking a little bit if you want. Again, the way you might rock from side to side, whatever feels comfortable. So this can be helpful. But if your difficulty is the fact that you're in a meeting and your boss just said something and you cannot believe what they said, you probably don't want to do this. So a variation is just fold your arms like this. No one needs to know, but do it like with the sense of comforting yourself. Like kind of give yourself a little squeeze, like, I cannot believe my boss just said that. This is horrible. I'm here for myself. It's going to be okay. So it doesn't have to be obvious. And then you can play and find your own type of touch. Everyone really is different. But I would say that I use touch, that's my go-to self-compassion practice because it's immediate, your body responds, there's a lot of symbolism in it. You can just use touch anytime you need it. You don't have to wake up and do 5 minutes of it. This is best done in the moment when you're struggling. And then there's another practice I'd like to teach called the self-compassion break, and that actually involves touch, but it has language as well. So the self-compassion break, this is actually often the way we do research to see how self-compassion helps people. It involves bringing in the 3 components of self-compassion intentionally. So we're thinking about something that's troubling us or causing us a distress. We bring in some mindfulness to the pain or discomfort. We remember we aren't alone through common humanity. And then we bring ourselves kindness both in the form of touch and some friendly, supportive words. Okay, so I'm actually going to sit down to lead this. I'm going to lead it more like a mini meditation, although you can do this really quickly in 30 seconds if you want. So again, really it just involves, you'll see mindfulness of the pain, remembering we aren't alone, common humanity, some touch, and some words of kindness. Okay. So if you feel comfortable, you may want to close your eyes to help you go inward. Oh, it feels good just to kind of take a moment to come back to the here and now. All right. So I would like you to think of some real issue you're having in your life right now that's causing you some stress or discomfort. You know, maybe something going on with your academics or with your work, a stressor, an issue, a problem. Might be something going on in a relationship. Might be a health issue. And please don't focus on something that's overwhelmingly difficult, because if you're overwhelmed, you won't be able to learn this practice. So something that's mild to moderately upsetting, distressing. And just take a moment to decide what feels good to work with and remind yourself what's going on, what's happening. And so the first thing we want to do is just, become aware of the discomfort with mindfulness. So kind of just acknowledging, this is really hard. Instead of just trying to solve the problem, take a moment just to be mindful of the pain of what it is, what's happening. This hurts. This is hard. And also remembering that the common humanity of this, you aren't alone. Many people are probably actually going through something very similar to you. But, the fact that you're going through this situation is what makes you human. It's part of life. It's part of being a human being. And again, we don't say this to belittle what you're going through, but just so we can remind ourselves there's nothing wrong with us. It's not abnormal. We aren't alone. But because it hurts, we do want to give ourselves some warmth and kindness. So one way to do that is with some touch. So try to use a touch that felt good to you. What we just did, soothing touch, could be hands on heart, on face, a hug, whatever feels right. So putting your hands on your body and feeling the warmth and support of your hands. Kind of signaling, I got you, I'm here for you. And then we want to bring in some words of kindness, encouragement, and support that are exactly what you need to hear right now in this situation. Maybe you need words of acceptance. It's okay to make mistakes. Or, you're doing the best you can. It's okay to be imperfect. Or maybe they're words of encouragement and motivation, like, you could make a change. I believe in you. I'm here for you. And if you don't know exactly what to say, it can be really helpful to imagine, what if you had a very close friend who was going through the exact same situation that you're going through? And same feeling, same situation. What might you naturally say to support your friend, to show them you're there for them? And then can you try saying something similar to yourself? And can you give yourself permission to receive your own kindness? And if feelings coming up are very intense, you can always kind of ground yourself into the floor or open your eyes. And everyone can open their eyes. Okay, so that's the basic practice. It's very simple, 3 main ingredients. Mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness. We find when they're all together, especially adding in the physiological element of the touch, it's a very powerful way to help you deal with feelings of difficulty in the moment. And sometimes, just to say, and I'll be talking more about this if you come to the session after this, but sometimes when we open our hearts in that way, it's like we also open up to a lot of the pain that we've been suppressing. And it can be kind of disturbing. So you also want to titrate the amount of self-compassion you give yourself. In other words, if it's too difficult, you get flooded with maybe trauma memories. You don't want to care for yourself that way, like with the self-compassion break. You may want to care for yourself some other way, like taking a walk or having a cup of tea or something like that. The idea is we want to be there for ourselves in whatever way we need it most. Okay, so I want to just talk about a few more things, and then I will open it up for questions. I want to talk a little bit about how self-compassion is helpful for burnout and also for caregiver burnout in particular. So we just released this book this last month because there's a lot of research, over 200 studies at this point, showing, again, that self-compassion really helps reduce and also helps people recover from burnout. So research shows that burnout is very, very common. The surveys are all over the place, but between 25 to 75% of people, depending on your profession, are reporting symptoms of burnout. So what are the key symptoms of burnout? Well, one is just exhaustion. That's the one we think of most readily. But also something called depersonalization, which is kind of a fancy word for saying we go a little bit numb. So we stop caring about our work or caring about other people as much because it's so much that we just kind of pull back and numb out as a way of dealing with all the stress. And then also feelings of incompetence, because often we blame ourselves for being exhausted and kind of feeling cut off and numb, and then we feel less competent as a result. And so what are the causes of burnout? Well, stress is usually the number one cause. And by the way, the work environment might mean professional work or also unpaid family caregiving work. So when it's really stressful, it's like it kind of exceeds our ability to cope with stress. Also, when we're in situations where it doesn't align with our values, we're put in situations where we're doing things that we don't feel right about, a common cause of burnout. And then lack of control. When we feel like we're in a stressful situation and there's very little we can do about it, that's also likely to lead to burnout. So self-compassion, what we know from the research, is a really good antidote for burnout. And if we just kind of go through those 3 things, well, actually I will about how it works, but you don't judge yourself for feeling stress, which means you feel less incompetent. You're keeping your heart open through self-compassion, which means you're less likely to numb out. And you're caring for yourself, which means you're less likely to get exhausted. So again, lots of research with people in a variety of different professions. So again, how does this work? Well, one of the really interesting things about self-compassion is, and that's why I said, in some ways the quintessential self-compassion question is, what do I need? Because just asking that question means my needs count too. And especially for caregivers or professional caregivers, we're taught to focus on other people's needs and kind of like to put our needs in the background. So with self-compassion, we say, my needs count too, which means we actually take them seriously and meet our needs. So for instance, self-compassionate people draw better boundaries. What's a boundary? I think one person said it, it's the point at which I can love you and me simultaneously, right? Okay, yeah, your needs are important, but my needs are important too. And so saying no, drawing a boundary, means just kind of my needs are important too. I need to tend to myself. Also better work-life balance. Instead of just giving yourself away, saying, hey, I need some other things, family time, personal time. So that's one way it helps reduce burnout. It also provides equanimity. So sometimes as caregivers, or just even in the work world, we think we should have control. We think we should be able to fix people, we should be able to make everything perfect or meet those impossible deadlines. In some ways, compassion gives us some humility. It's like, yeah, of course I'm going to try my best, but I'm not superhuman. I'm human. I'm limited. I can't control everything. And then when we remember that wisdom, it's kind of like the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's what self-compassion does for us, right? It reminds us that, hey, we can do our best, but we can't control everything. And then the other reason that self-compassion is really good in reducing burnout, especially for caregivers, has to do with the difference between compassion and empathy. So a lot of people use these words as synonyms. They actually mean something very different. In the field of psychology, they're pretty distinct. So let me just again remind you what compassion is. Compassion is concern with the alleviation of suffering, so it's focused on suffering in particular. There's this desire to do something about it. And it's a rewarding and energizing experience. When we feel loving, connected presence, it's a positive feeling. There's actually research that shows the reward centers of the brain are activated even if we're in the presence of someone who's suffering. If we feel compassion, if our heart's open toward that person, the feeling of compassion itself is a rewarding experience. Empathy is actually, first of all, it's neutral. It can apply to suffering, it can apply to happiness, it can apply to anything. It's simply emotional resonance. We feel whatever other people are feeling. This is just a pre-verbal capacity of the human brain. We've got neurons called mirror neurons who are designed to resonate with the emotions of others. A lot of the real estate of the brain is designed just to simply to feel what other people are feeling. So for instance, if you see someone laugh, you start laughing, you feel good. If you see someone slam their finger in the door, the pain centers of your brain will get activated. So this is just the way human brains work, right? We feel what other people are feeling. It doesn't necessarily mean we care what other people are feeling. So for instance, con artists often have very good empathy skills. They're very sensitive to what other people are feeling, but they use that information to take advantage of other people, not to help them. So compassion in particular, it involves some empathy. We feel what other people are feeling, but we also care about others and want to help. So the slight problem with empathic resonance, especially for caregivers, is if maybe you're a family caregiver, a special needs kid, or your elderly parents, or you're a professional caregiver, day after day, if you're constantly resonating with people who are feeling stress or are feeling suffering and pain, especially if you're an empathic person, and often people who are caregivers are especially empathic, then you are feeling that pain in your brain day after day. And if all your compassion goes outward and none of it goes inward, you will burn out, right? You will run dry because of just the activation of all the others' pain. And actually, I don't know if you've heard this, but in the field of psychology, there's a movement away from calling it compassion fatigue. A lot of people refer to the phenomena of nurses and doctors and people in caregiving professions, how fatiguing it is. It's not compassion fatigue. Compassion is not fatiguing. Empathy is fatiguing, especially empathy without compassion can be fatiguing. So what self-compassion does is that it provides a buffer when we're resonating with other people's distress. So, it's like this cheesy cartoon, put your own oxygen mask on when helping others. So when you are with other people and you're empathically resonating with their stress or their distress, when you consciously kind of give yourself compassion for, well, it feels really hard, this feels overwhelming, or maybe I don't know what to do, or I feel so frustrated I can't help, or, when you put some of your focus on yourself as well as others, then it keeps you in the game. And again, there's research showing that we're less overwhelmed by the stress of others when we can get in the moment, focus on how difficult it is for us, and again, embody that loving, connected presence toward ourselves. And what this does is not only does it keep us from burning out, this is a really cool thing. It actually helps the other people directly, because mirror neurons and empathic resonance goes both ways. So if you're with someone and they're really stressed or suffering and you're feeling burnt out or frustrated, remember, this is pre-verbal. They're going to kind of feel that stress and frustration in you. But if you give yourself compassion, this is so hard, it's hard for me, I'm here for myself, I care about myself, then what they feel is your loving, connected presence. So I'm going to open it up for questions, but first I just want to tell you a little story, because I learned this firsthand. I write a lot about this in my books, but I write a lot about my son, Rowan, who's just a joy in this world, but he's also autistic. And when he was younger, self-compassion in particular is what allowed me to deal with his intense tantrums. I'm sure a lot of you know autistic kids, sometimes when they tantrum, you just can't reach them. It was constant. It was really challenging for me. And so what I would do when he would have a tantrum or I couldn't reach him is I would give myself compassion. Actually, I tell this story in my TED Talk, but I'll repeat it here. One time we were on a plane. We were on a transatlantic flight from Austin to London, and it was right after the meal, and they turned the lights down on the plane, and he was very sensitive to any change in his environment. So when they turned the lights down so that everyone could sleep, it startled him, and he went in a full-on, flailing, screaming tantrum on the plane, 5 years old, and I was like, what am I going to do? And everyone was looking at us, and it was like, what's wrong with that kid? He looked normal. He was 5. What's wrong with that mother? And so the only thing I could think of is, maybe if I take him to the toilets, he can have his tantrum in there, and it won't be so disturbing. So I did that, and I got to the toilets while carrying him, which were, of course, occupied, because the lesson life had for me in that moment was not how to escape a situation, but what do you do when you've got no escape? You have no other option. But I did have another option, which was self-compassion, because I've been practicing it for like 7 years. So what I did is I actually put him on the ground. I know, probably unsanitary, but he was screaming and flailing. So we got on the ground, so he was safe. And I just started holding myself and rocking myself. They were already staring at us. I didn't care what people thought. It's like, it's okay, Kristen. It's okay, you'll get through this. And I'm so sorry this is happening. It's okay, I'm here for you. And as I started calming down, what do you think happened to Rowan? He started to calm down. And then I could reach him more directly. And so that was an extreme situation, but it happened again and again. And so I actually learned to regulate his emotions by regulating my own, because they say autistic kids aren't empathic. Not true. They're very sensitive and empathic. They have trouble perspective taking. But anyway, so it breaks my heart when people think that self-compassion is selfish, because really the state of mind you cultivate is the state of mind you communicate and share with every single person you meet. So it really is not only a gift for yourself, but a gift for others. Okay, so we got time for questions. How are we supposed to end at 1:20 or 1:30? Brad?
Yeah, 1:20.
Okay, so we have 11 minutes for questions. Great.
Thanks for your presentation. So in my class the other day, we were talking about the golden rule. Do unto others as you would do unto yourself. You're kind of doing it the other way.
Yes.
But the comments in the class were how fashionable and popular it is today to clap when someone is really nasty publicly, right? And I'm thinking about leaders. I won't mention names, but and we all talk about polarization. So
yeah.
I'm sure you've thought about this. What's up with that? What's going on in our culture that many of our fellow citizens are really celebrate nastiness, and how can we be lights to change that?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of pain in the world. People, even if maybe economically you're okay, a lot of people aren't economically okay, but people have a lot of pain, a lot of distress, and it's hard to know how to handle that pain. And I guess I like to think that, maybe there's a part of them, a part of people that feels like they can express that pain kind of in this external way. I don't know, it's kind of above my pay grade, but I think what compassion says is we're all human beings, we're all hurting, we're all doing the best we can. Sometimes I think some ways of dealing with our pain are more or less healthy, but I think it's really important to try not to dehumanize anyone, because again, we're really all human beings doing the best we can. Doesn't mean we can't do with the fear of self-compassion to try to bring, goodness in the world. But so I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you. But in terms of anxiety, a lot of people have election anxiety no matter what side of the spectrum you're on. Self-compassion. Actually, I just did a piece for the Washington Post on this, right? I interviewed the reporter. Self-compassion. A lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of family conflict around this. A lot of people disagree. Good time to practice self-compassion. It's hard, and you aren't alone. Okay. Sorry, another question?
So I have two questions. My first question is, I went onto your, sorry, hi.
Oh, there you are. Oh, there you are. Okay, great.
I went onto the website that you had up there, and it had your self-compassion test. And I was just curious if you would share with us what your score is for your self-compassion test.
I've never taken it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But
okay.
I could give you an estimate. It's pretty high. So, I've been practicing for 25 years. So feelings of shame still come up, feelings of, feeling really badly that I make mistakes still come up. But it doesn't take long for me to give myself compassion. I wish I could say it made me a person who doesn't make mistakes, shameful mistakes. It doesn't. But I'm pretty quick to remember to give myself compassion. It actually does become a habit over time. So.
Cool. And then my second question was, I'm just imagining that I have a client come in and it's really clear that they need self-compassion, and that they need to work on that. And I feel like a question that I would get asked as a clinician is, okay, so where do I start? How would you answer that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not a clinician, but I have a lot of clinician friends. And so I think, remember that what you're doing in therapy is you're modeling self-compassion. So that's a really good way to start, just to be self-compassionate. You can try talking about it and see how receptive they are. You don't want to shove it down anyone's throat and have them think, oh, that's one more thing I'm bad at. Actually I get emails like that sometimes. That's not the point. So you might have to go roundabout, but if there is some openness to it, again, you can send them to my website and have them take the scale, or ask them how would they treat this, treat a friend that way. Some more scientific types are reassured by the research, some don't care, but some people it kind of helps them feel a little better. There's 7,000 studies showing it's not going to make you lazy or self-indulgent. So, yeah. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
So I had a question. I work in a daycare, and for the most part, we take care of infants up to 4 years old, but we do after-school care. And so my question was, I've had a lot of children that they come from kind of broken, less well-off families, so we work a lot with them socially and emotionally. And my question was kind of like, how can you, because we talked about teaching self-care, like how can you teach self-care when like it's so crucial, but they don't seem as interested? Because like a lot of the older kids that we take care of, like they'd much rather just have like us as like teachers and caregivers just come and take care of it, just come and fix it, just come give them all the attention and all that they need, and they need a lot of it, and we just do not have the capacity to give that to them as much as they need. So is there like something we can do to encourage them to kind of incorporate self-compassion more in their behaviors?
A colleague of mine, Jamie Lynn Tautara, just came out with a book, actually like last week, for young kids, and I endorsed it, and I can't remember the name. It's It's on my website. Her name is Jamie Lynn Tartar, but I'll tell you what she does. She has a workbook. What she has found, she's worked a lot with kids, is like stuffed animals or some sort of animal is a really good way to help kids have self-compassion. So, if you work with these kids and they have, let's say, a teddy bear or some other stuffed animal, you can almost use that as a kind of avatar for compassion, right? So when they hug their teddy bear, so instead of just doing it like unconsciously, okay, when you do that, you're giving yourself compassion by hugging your teddy bear. Or you can say your teddy bear is giving you compassion. But making it fun, using things that speak to kids in a way that resonates with them, like animals, stuffed animals, things like that, can be really useful. So I would say that the more you can help them practice self-compassion, the more they're less dependent on their caregivers, because maybe at home they aren't getting that, the better, But and it actually does make you less dependent on others, which is great. But doing it in creative ways, and I'm sure you could do it as a teacher, figure out fun ways that you might get that message across.
Sorry.
Oh, got 4 more minutes, great.
Okay. So you talked about cultural blocks and how that kind of inhibits people from learning self-compassionate skills at a younger age because of how they grew up.
Yeah.
And I know that in some minority groups, like Hispanic, Asian demographics, they struggle more with learning self-compassion because of how their parents raised them. So is there a way to teach adults self-compassionate skills and have them exercise that onto their children?
Yeah, well, it has to definitely be culturally sensitive. I mean, because things are going to resonate different in different cultural groups, and the language you use, the examples you use would need to be different. I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but I want to say it anyway. Sometimes people, if you belong to a group that has been devalued by the larger culture, you actually also kind of internalize that message. So not only might it be your family of origin, but also the culture might devalue you. I've had a lot of people in groups that have been marginalized or devalued say that actually fierce self-compassion for them is the most important. This idea of like standing up for what's right, saying no, drawing boundaries, that kind of energy. Because if you grow up in an environment where you aren't safe, it can feel a little vulnerable to practice tender self-compassion. And actually, if you look at it with the nervous system, parasympathetic means you are less vigilant. So you can be vigilant with fierce self-compassion. Again, it's still coming from love. It's not coming from fear. But like that idea that I can stand tall, I can protect myself, sometimes that can be more of an in for people. So, I can't really, it's kind of a complex question, but if you're someone who works with those, various cultural groups, I would put that to you. Maybe you can find ways to teach people self-compassion that works, that's culturally relevant. Because here's just one thing to think about. There's a lot of different ways you can give yourself compassion. It could be, I give compassion to myself. It could be, I think of how I give compassion to a friend and then do a U-turn. Or sometimes I could imagine what a really compassionate other, how they would relate to me. I remember I taught self-compassion to some nuns once, and I talked about using Jesus as a source of compassion. It worked beautifully for them. Or a grandparent or the ancestors or whatever works culturally, as the vehicle for letting the love and compassion in. It doesn't have to be just, I'm going to give compassion for myself if that doesn't resonate. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Would you give us your website again?
Yes, selfcompassion.org. You can just Google self-compassion. I got in early, so all the Google goes straight to me. Yeah. I've also created an online community called Self-Compassion Community for people. It's a subscription thing, but live events with me and just more help and support, including mentor sessions. You can also take a free, you don't need it because you just heard it from me, but if you have friends, we offer free introduction to self-compassion sessions for if you have someone who wants, maybe a client who'd be interested. Yeah.
If you're okay, we'll sneak in one last question.
Yes.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Great.
Just a quick one. I'm curious if you've noticed a difference when you practice self-compassion, if you speak the words out loud or just in your mind. Like when you were in the airplane with your son,
Yeah.
was it out loud or in your mind, or when you're alone?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So usually I do it silently if I'm in public. On the airplane, it was just I just did it out loud because there's no research actually comparing it for the self, whether it makes it better to do it out loud or silently, and I think it's just a personal preference. But there is research showing that if you hear someone speaking out loud self-compassionately, you're more likely to internalize it. So, I mean, again, just your presence makes a big difference, so because people resonate with their mirror neurons. But if you speak it out loud, it really makes a difference. And then what you're doing, because there's like this cultural thing of self-sacrifice, or we aren't taught it. If you talk about it out loud, that other people think, oh wow, maybe I can be self-compassionate. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. And what does that sound like? What does that look like? So that type of modeling is, most people think about it. When you make a mistake, we say, oh, I'm such an idiot, because we're hoping to get compassion from someone else, which is understandable, but you're also modeling that's what you're supposed to say when you make a mistake, is I'm such an idiot. Instead of waiting for the other person to give you compassion, you can use it as an opportunity to model giving yourself compassion. And then you're also spreading that. It really is a skill that you're helping other people to develop. Okay, so I think there's a 10-minute break, and then I will be doing another 50-minute session where I'll be talking about backdraft for those of you who are therapists, about what can arise with self-compassion practice and how mindfulness can be good for that, and also how mindfulness and self-compassion kind of do a little dance together in working with difficult emotions. So hopefully I'll see some of you back here.
Thank you. So just so you're oriented, we have the National Association of Social Workers Utah board here. That'll be in the Whiting room during this breakout, or you're welcome to stay in here with Dr. Neff. But both are happening simultaneously. So have a 10-minute break, come back 1:30. Thank you.
Were you able to talk to Mary? Were you able to talk?
I did. I talked to her before that.
I was like, I've been staring at the back of her head this entire time. I know where she's at. I'm well aware. I felt so weird standing up there with the microphone. I felt like I was about to be the one talking, and I was like, no, I'm not
you
saying
guys
shit.
to accidentally turn it on and start being like, you're just like mumbling under your breath, but it's like going through. Oh, I would have loved that. I'm so weak. Are we supposed to keep so?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know if Brad expects us to start the David guys one. Or if we're just sit out in the hall or something.
That's risky right before we have to go.
Because it'd be kind of weird if like a table or all at once early on to a session. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that might be the vibes we get on.
I don't think.
Yeah, right. It kind of sucks that they're doing both these two things at the same time. Because I kind of wanted to go to the board thing, like the NASW board thing. And I'm like, man, that sucks that we don't get to go see that.
I found the post that my family listen to that. Yeah.
Wait, what?
Where'd you get that?
At the other conference?
Yeah, I think there'd be more application, which is still good. Like, I think that's an important thing for me. And then I also don't know what the fuck we're doing with that SW thing. Like, I don't know if it's even really about. That's a discussion, but.
I wish we could give more of a
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm like, shit.
I'm so tired.
What if I just said,
Welcome everybody back. We're now in part 2 with Kristen Neff. So thanks for joining us. We're really also grateful she's doing part 2. We appreciate part 1 so much. It's nice to be able to hear more. So please give her a round of applause one more time, and we'll begin.
Okay, so we learn from our mistakes. Now I've got my clicker and it works, so that's good. So I mentioned that backdraft is something that comes up. Just show of hands, how many of you are therapists or clinicians in some way? Okay, I thought probably the majority would be who stayed for this extra bit. So backdraft is really something important to know about. Backdraft is actually a term that my colleague Chris Germer came up with to describe a phenomena he saw in his patients, but we see in everyone, that often when we practice self-compassion, we think we're going to feel calm, we think we're going to feel soothed, we think we're going to feel like happy, and instead often we feel the opposite. And so the term backdraft refers to, it's a firefighting term. When a house is on fire, the firefighters don't just open the doors of the house and put the fire hoses in, because what happens is the air rushes in, it ignites with the flames, and the flames rush out. Same thing can actually happen with self-compassion practice. So like we give ourselves unconditional love, and then not working? That's okay. We give ourselves unconditional love, and immediately we remember all the conditions under which we were unloved, or remember all the ways in which we are unlovable. So it's kind of like a contrast, right? When we're giving ourselves the kindness and warmth, immediately we start to remember all the things, the ways we weren't supported, or the ways we don't think we're worthy of support. So and another way to think of it is, we open the doors of our heart, just like that house on fire, and all the old pain comes rushing out. So it's good to know about, because it will happen, and also, this is the important thing, it's a good sign. Chris likes to say, don't worry, it feels like kaboom, but really it's kabloom. And he shakes his head like that, kabloom. It's kabloom because we need the pain to see the light of day in order for it to be healed, right? So in all that suffering and pain and self-doubt and judgment and trauma and everything is just like stuffed inside of us, it can't be healed. It's just there. It can't do anything, and then it causes all sorts of problems. So with self-compassion, remember, which is a way of kind of opening the pain with mindfulness and a sense of connectedness, it makes it safe for that pain to emerge. But sometimes it can feel overwhelming. So basically what we want to do when backdraft arises is we want to work with it in a way that's not destabilizing. Because if backdraft is really intense, maybe we start disassociating or we get lost in traumatic memories, then actually we're just kind of training ourselves and being overwhelmed. So we want to practice self-compassion, self-compassionately in a way that's going to help us rather than hurt us. So basically, how do you deal with backdraft? First thing is just mindfulness. In other words, just to name it. Oh, that's backdraft. I'm aware that what's happening now is backdraft. You can tell yourself or clients or people who are practicing self-compassion about the phenomena. So, for instance, often as a teacher of self-compassion, if I have someone get really angry at me when I say something, I know, oh, that's backdraft. You don't need to take it personally. It's actually very common. If someone has a lot of anger inside of them, again, they open up, it's likely to come out with other people. But if you explain it, then it just normalizes it. Because what happens is people, some people, they really want to practice self-compassion. They know they want to hold their pain. They start doing it, and then all of a sudden they just feel worse, or they feel shame, or they feel bad memories, or they feel frightened. And then they think they're doing it wrong, and then they blame themselves for not being able to do self-compassion right. So this message that it's a part of the process, it's normal, it's actually a good sign, is a really important one to talk about, so name it. Also, what we know with mindfulness, and I'm going to be going more deeply into mindfulness in just a moment, is that anytime you focus your attention on a single object, it has a tendency of calming and settling the mind. So why do we say, like, take a breath? Because when you take a breath, what happens is you're focusing on the sensation of breathing, and that focus is like the metaphor is a glass with silt in it. You know, it's all jumbled up, and our suffering and all our thoughts and emotions. And if we still the mind, it actually allows it to calm and settle. So we actually want to move our attention away from the backdraft itself and move it to some other thing, like the breath, or actually, I'm going to teach you a practice in a moment that you can use called maybe the soles of your feet. But really important to know is that sometimes even mindfulness is too much. Sometimes even being present and being aware is actually too much. In that case, we want to practice self-compassion behaviorally. Do something behaviorally that's not mind training, that's not compassion training or mindfulness training, but just doing something that's going to allow you to calm and settle yourself. So petting your cat, for instance, right? Doing something soothing externally, having a cup of tea, going for a walk. We tell people when they take our mindful self-compassion courses that we say to people at the beginning of them, if in the middle of an exercise you experience backdraft, you get up from your table and you walk out of this room, we're going to say, yay, they're practicing self-compassion. Because self-compassion is not so much like what you do, it's really a way of being with yourself. It doesn't really matter whether or not you're feeling good or you're feeling bad. What matters is you're asking yourself, what do I need right now to care for myself? And sometimes what we need is not to practice self-compassion or mindfulness or any of these other techniques we're trying to bring. So I'm going to teach you a little practice, but before I do that, I just thought it might be a good time, actually, we could just sort of open. Any questions about backdraft? Does it make sense? It's a really important concept, especially if you're going to be teaching this to others. Yeah?
I've heard the term re-traumatization before. Is that interchangeable with backdraft?
It's not interchangeable because it doesn't necessarily re-traumatize you, but it could. So if you had a lot of backdraft come up, let's say you flooded with traumatic memories and you didn't deal with it in a compassionate way, it could re-traumatize you. So backdraft is more general. And also backdraft can be, sometimes people, it doesn't have to be major trauma. Sometimes like you just have memories of being teased in middle school or something like that. It doesn't have to be big trauma. Sometimes it just feels uncomfortable, and so that feeling of discomfort that comes up, we might call backdraft as well. So, but if you aren't careful, and you don't, again, I said earlier, you maybe titrate how much self-compassion you give. Maybe you just do a little bit like, oh, that's too much. Maybe I'll just pet my cat instead. So you kind of, another way to think of it is conscious opening and closing. Most people, they close down when they feel backdraft unconsciously, like they go to the refrigerator or they have a drink or whatever it is. They don't think about why they're doing it. If you stop practicing self-compassion as an act of self-care, well, that's too much. I think I'm going to do something else. You're still building the memory and the muscle of self-care and caring for your needs, right? So they're related, but something important to be aware of. Any other questions on that? Okay, good concept. All right, so actually I want to teach you a little practice. I think we have time that's very useful for dealing with, backdraft, actually any intense and disturbing emotions. So the editor of the journal Mindfulness, a man named Nirbhay Singh, has done a lot of research on a very simple mindfulness practice that's useful when we're feeling intense, difficult emotions. Again, whether it's backdraft or just for any reason. And that is involves feeling the soles of our feet. So I'd invite everyone to stand up if you can stand. If you have mobility issues, you can do the sitting. But if you're comfortable standing, please stand. Okay. So I would invite everyone just to, right now, just notice the soles of your feet. Just feel the soles of your feet. how do you know what's the sole of your feet? What's the floor? What's the sensation? Is there tightness or tension, pressure, heat, cold, tingling? Just put all your attention in this little area in the soles of your feet. Maybe start moving your body a little bit from side to side. And notice how that when you move your upper body, the feelings, the sensations change in the soles of your feet. Okay, and come back to standing. And I'll just try making a little circle where you are. Don't walk around the room, but just try, you could, but just for now, just make a little circle. There's 360-degree turn. And as you're moving, just notice as you lift and place each foot that this is all kind of felt in the soles of your feet. Okay, then you can sit down. Really dead, easy, simple practice, but research shows, like brain scans show, that if your amygdala is really active, putting all your attention in the soles of your feet actually helps calm you down. Why? I think there's a lot of reasons. One is that's actually a mindfulness practice. Instead of being lost in the storyline of how upset we are, how difficult things are, we actually are focusing on one thing, which is the sensations in the soles of our feet. It's kind of a small object, and it settles us down. There's also some other reasons, which I can't scientifically prove, but I'm pretty sure they're true. The soles of your feet is as far away from your brain as it's physically possible to get and still be in your body. So it's a way of being embodied in a way that's really separate from all the craziness going up there to the soles of your feet. And also there's something about grounding yourself into the earth, right? Feeling that point of connection with the earth that seems to calm and stabilize you. So believe it or not, when we taught a self-compassion to nurses and doctors at Dell Children's Hospital who are dealing with very stressful situations, it can be used for backdraft, but what they would do is going from room to room, they would just like ground their attention in the soles of their feet as they walked. And it's a very easy to do mindfulness practice, and can be helpful to you or anyone else. So let's talk a little bit about mindfulness and also what the difference is between mindfulness and self-compassion. And it is a little confusing because mindfulness is an aspect of self-compassion, right? But it's not exactly the same either. So let me talk you through a little bit some of the differences, how they work together, and then most importantly, I'm going to teach a practice where we can use mindfulness and self-compassion to work with difficult emotions. So mindfulness is a way of being present with what is, being aware of what is, but in a particular way where we accept rather than resist the reality of the present moment. So it has two components: present moment awareness and then non-resistance. So what do we mean by resistance? Resistance is when we want things to be other than they are. We think that things should be, right now, in this very moment, other than they are. The problem with resistance, first of all, I should say resistance is completely natural. Even an amoeba will move away from a toxin in a petri dish. So it's a natural desire, a biological desire to move away from anything toxic or anything painful. The problem is when something's happening, it's happening. And in the moment, yet future moments may be different, but right now it is happening. And if we don't accept the fact that it's happening, it's like we're banging our head against the wall of reality. So, let's say you're stuck in a traffic jam. Yeah, you're going to be late for your meeting. It's painful. It's a problem. And that's there. But resisting the fact that you're stuck in the traffic jam and are going to be late for your meeting just makes things that much worse. So there's kind of a formula. How much we suffer from our pain is directly proportional to how much we resist that pain. So you might say, in a way, when we learn mindfulness, which is a way of reducing resistance to suffering, it actually is an act of compassion because it decreases our suffering. Let me show you a little video clip that kind of that shows this process of resistance and what happens when we accept it. And we couldn't get this to work, so hopefully this will work. Let's see. Can you hear that? Good. So it kind of really beautifully illustrates, the more we resist painful experiences, usually the worse they get. Another way this is sometimes described is what we resist not only persists, but grows stronger, typically. So maybe, for instance, you got a big meeting the next day and you can't fall asleep at night, and you want to get a good night's rest, and you're trying to get a good night's rest, and you can't sleep, and you kind of get irritated by the fact that you can't sleep, and you wish you could sleep, and why can't I sleep? And you start resisting the fact that you can't sleep. Does that mean you're going to fall peacefully in slumber? No, right? That can really cause, actually, if it happens a lot, you might even develop insomnia. So this is just a basic psychological principle. Sometimes, it's so funny. I remember when I tried to teach my son mindfulness, and he said, "But Mommy, I don't want to accept the pain." And it's like it broke my heart because of course we don't. And I wish resistance worked. I really wish it did. But unfortunately it doesn't. Now, it doesn't mean to say that in future moments we might be able to, maybe the guy could get a screen on the door so there's no flies. There are things you can do in the future, but right now this is what is happening. If you resist the reality of the present moment, it just makes things worse. So an interesting question is, well, what's the difference between mindfulness and compassion then? Because compassion is about, can also involve action and concern with the alleviation of suffering. So how can we want to alleviate suffering at the same time that we accept that suffering is occurring? And so what happens is mindfulness, that's why mindfulness is actually built into self-compassion, the mindfulness and the kindness. The way they come together is they kind of operate at slightly different levels. So mindfulness is aimed at experience, the present moment experience, what's happening right now, and we accept that this is happening without resistance. Compassion, the warmth and the kindness, is kind of aimed at the person who's having the painful experience and kind of says, oh, I'm so sorry, is there anything I can do to help? So compassion, you might say, isn't aimed at the experience, it's aimed at the experiencer. So it's like fully accepting that this moment sucks. Oh, I'm so sorry, is there anything I can do to help in the future moments? It's kind of a kindness and a warmth to the person who's having the experience. So they come together and they create a paradox. And we like to say this is the paradox of self-compassion practice, which is, and make your head scratch because it's a paradox, we give ourselves compassion not to feel better, but because we feel bad. And I should probably put in parentheses, not feel better in the moment. Because of course in the future we want to get better, we want to care about ourselves. But in the moment when pain is arising, if we start using self-compassion practice to make the pain go away, it's actually a form of resistance, and it might make things worse. So for instance, maybe after this lecture or after reading a book, next time you can't fall asleep before a big meeting, maybe you put your hands on your heart. Oh, I wish I could fall asleep. It's so hard. I'm so stressed about the meeting. You put your hands on your heart, your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and you just fall asleep. And then next time it happens, it's like, I got a strategy. I can't sleep. I'm going to put my hands on my heart to make the sleeplessness go away, right? So your intention is changed. Instead of just showing up for yourself, your intention is subtly changed to trying to manipulate the situation or resist the pain. And if you do it with that agenda, like I want to control the situation, I want to make it other than it is, then it's actually going to stop working. And this is really important to know about because not only will you do it, if you work with clients, they will definitely do it. Everyone does it. It's natural. It's like self-compassion works, it's effective, it actually does work so that, for a lot of reasons we're resisting less and we're just supporting ourselves, and it does tend to make us feel better. And then eventually we start to co-opt self-compassion as a manipulation and control strategy to resist the present moment. Again, not as like something in the long term. Some compassion is more just like, putting water and fertilizer on the soil so things grow well. It can't change the fact that right now things hurt. And so once you start doing that, or once the clients you work with start doing that, just be aware that it's gonna mean that the self-compassion practice, not only might it not work, it actually might lead to some more resistance. So one thing you can do is ask yourself or ask someone else, are you giving yourself compassion right now to make the pain go away or simply because it hurts? And when you make that shift, I see it, I'm trying to resist the pain. Okay, I'm doing it just because I hurt. Then everything kind of falls together more smoothly. Another analogy is like, let's say your kid has the 24-hour flu, it's going around school, everyone has it, it's going to take 24 hours. You don't, soothe that child, care for that child to drive the flu out because it's going to take 24 hours. You're doing it simply because your child's in pain and needs their parents' love and comfort, right? Same thing with ourselves. We do it just to be with ourselves with the hope and kind of, things hopefully will transform for the better. But right now, it hurts. I need to accept that. Does that make sense? Any questions about this? It is a paradox, but I know a lot of people who are long-term mindfulness practitioners are like, wait a second, aren't you trying to change things? No, if you're using it as a way to try to change things, it actually is not going to work as a practice. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay. Good. And just to say, one of the nice things about self-compassion, though, especially for those of you, maybe some of you actually use mindfulness in your clinical work or just for yourself, you practice mindfulness, is the sense of safety provided by self-compassion. When you put your hands on your heart or you're there for yourself because you hurt, actually makes it easier to open to the pain. So they actually work together. Right? So we need to be open to the pain in order to give ourselves compassion, but the more we give ourselves warmth and compassion, the easier it is to open to the pain. So they actually work in synergy. Okay, so let's talk about how we can use both mindfulness and self-compassion to meet difficult emotions, especially the warmth aspect of self-compassion. I don't have a slide for this, I probably should, but if you think about it, mindfulness refers to space, and compassion refers to warmth. And yes, there is mindfulness in compassion. We need some space. If there's no space, we can't give ourselves the warmth. But we need both space and warmth to really deal with difficult emotions in a healthy way. Sometimes when you have a difficult emotion and you're just being mindful of it, and there's no warmth, there's no sense of, oh, I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. It just feels too scary or it feels kind of cold. On the other hand, if you're just using the warmth with no mindfulness, then you might devolve into self-pity. But space and warmth together really helps us hold difficult emotions. It's like we're aware of the pain and we're loving ourselves up because we're hurting. So how can we use, so in particular, I have a practice I'm going to teach you that's also in the Mindful Self-Compassion program of how we can use both mindfulness and compassion, space and warmth, to work with pain. So one very effective way of using mindfulness to work with difficult emotions is simply labeling them. So labeling or kind of noticing what we're feeling is actually a mindfulness practice. We're becoming, instead of just being lost in the difficult emotion, we actually, when we say what we're feeling, when we label it, when we're aware of it, that actually means we're kind of not lost in the emotion, but we have a little bit of space around it. So we say, this is what I'm feeling. I have a little funny story I like to tell about this sometimes. When I was practicing mindfulness a lot, and I was with my son, Rowan. I had taken him to a bird show at the zoo, and we got there a little bit late, and everyone was quiet, watching the birds, and Rowan was very kind of rambunctious and rowdy, and he was talking really loudly, and so we got in our seats, and the woman in the row of seats ahead of us, she had two very quiet little girls, perfectly watching the bird show, not saying anything. She kept on looking back at us and saying shh. She kept on shushing Rowan. He was being a little disruptive. But she kept on shushing him. And at one point, Rowan's like, Mommy, who is that? And by the way, if anyone does anything kind of threatening to my son, talk about Mama Bear. And so Rowan says, Mommy, who is that? And I'm going to admit it. I said, and I used a word that started with B, and it wasn't bear. Okay, so I lost it, in other words. I was like, how dare you should say. Okay, and then the bird show ends, and then the woman says, I can't believe you called me the B word. I'm like, I can't believe you kept on shushing my son, and you gave him the evil eye even. And we started going at it. Two moms at a bird show, right? We started going in front of our kids. But luckily, I was practicing a lot of mindfulness at the time. I really was. And I was able to say, I am really angry right now. And the woman was like, yeah, tell me something I don't know. But for me, that's what I've actually been doing a lot of labeling practice, switching from being lost in the anger and almost probably would have come to blows, but really losing it in front of my kids at a bird show, Saying, I am so angry right now, actually gave me that little bit of space. It brought mindfulness in to the fact that I was really angry. I was kind of losing it. And that's actually what allowed me to de-escalate and leave. So and this is kind of a funny way of saying, don't underestimate the power of labeling your emotions. That little sliver of space between being lost in an emotion and being aware of what we're feeling often allows us to make better choices. So when we're in the group of difficult emotions, just asking yourself, what am I feeling, and having a label for it. Again, research by David Creswell shows that labeling your difficult emotions also calms down amygdala reactivity. So this is a very useful exercise. What are you feeling? Label it. Another very useful mindfulness practice is becoming aware of where you feel an emotion in your body, right? And so what we know in psychology is all emotions have both a cognitive component, the storyline of what's happening, but they're also experienced as a physical sensation. That's why they're called feelings, right? It's actually felt as a physical sensation in your body, often very localized. It might be in your throat, it might be in your stomach. Sometimes it's just all over physical sensation. But the reason mindfulness is so useful for dealing with difficult feelings in the body, I don't know if any of you have taken like a mindfulness-based stress reduction course where they have you do these body scans for like 45 minutes to help build the skill of what's called interoception, the ability to feel what's going on in your body. Because when we're in the grip of intense and difficult emotions, instead of being lost in the storyline of what's happening, which often escalates into maybe unskillful action, if we can just say, oh, feeling of my gut feels like it's clenched, or my heart feels hollow, or my throat feels constricted, or I have pounding in my head. When we actually experience emotions as a physical sensation and are aware of them, so we're connected with them. We aren't tuned out. We aren't lost in them. We have space around them by experiencing them as a bodily sensation. That's another way that helps. And then, for instance, the body scan can be really useful to feel the stress in your body, but it works even better, I think, when we also bring compassion in. So we not only have the space, but we also have the warmth. So we can bring compassion to ourselves when we're having the difficult emotions. Again, not to drive it away, but just because we hurt. Physically, we can actually soften our body. Usually difficult emotions are felt as a contraction in the body. So bringing warmth and softening our bodies, a type of physical soothing and compassion. Words of comfort and soothing and support can help. And then finally, when we just allow ourselves to feel as we feel, kind of with the total acceptance of self-compassion, then this is where mindfulness and compassion kind of turn into each other. Because when we allow ourselves to be as we are, we're reducing resistance, which means we're reducing our suffering. So these are kind of 5 slightly separate skills, and I'm going to teach a practice. This is one of the most, I think, effective and popular practices from the Mindful Self-Compassion Program called Soften, Soothe, and Allow, which I'm going to teach you, which we're going to do. You can teach it to other people. I've got a guided practice on my website where we're going to think of a situation, creating some difficult emotions. We're going to label what we're feeling. We're going to find the feelings as a physical sensation in our body. We're going to soften around them. We bring warmth to it. We're going to soothe and comfort ourselves because we're feeling it. And then we're going to just allow the emotion to be there. And if you're saying, the last thing in the world I want to do right now is open up to more difficult emotions, that's okay. You don't have to participate in this practice. But if you are curious, it can be, this is probably the second, next to soothing touch, this is the second most common practice I do. I don't know about you, I tend to wake up at 3 in the morning when all my thoughts and troubles come to me. It's a great practice to do when you're in bed, to be there for yourself with those difficult emotions. And it often helps you fall asleep. Although don't do it in order to fall asleep, just because you can't fall asleep. Okay. Yeah, so this will probably take about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Okay. This is a great practice to do lying down. It's not the best place to do that here, but it's really nice to do when you're in the midst of a really difficult situation. Listening to this when you're lying down is it can be really helpful. Okay. So if you're willing, please close your eyes. Let's just take a moment to settle into our body. So feeling your feet touching the floor. Feeling the weight of your body on your chair. Okay. So I would invite you, as I said, to think of a situation in your life right now, a real situation that's causing you some difficult emotions. It can be the same thing you thought of when we did the self-compassion break. It could be something different. So it could be something happening in the world, like an election, or something else happening in the world, a lot of stuff happening in the world. It could be something happening in your personal life. Maybe a conflict you're having with somebody, or in a relationship. It may be something that's coming up for you personally. Maybe you made a mistake you're feeling badly about, or you're struggling with feelings of inadequacy. Might be a health challenge. Okay, so interview a few candidates and try to hire the right person for the job, because we don't want it to be so difficult and overwhelming that you can't focus, or we don't want it to bring up a lot of backdraft, hopefully, but something that is real, that's challenging for you to deal with. Okay, so just let the situation play out in your mind, what's happening. And then what we're going to do is we're going to become kind of curious. Use mindfulness just to see what's arising right now, what's present, what emotions are present. Right? Could be a fear or anxiety or frustration, sadness, grief, disappointment, insecurity, shame. Right? Could be confusion, boredom. It might be a few different things. So if you notice what emotion is here, just kind of make a mental note of it. I see. I'm feeling anxiety. This is anxiety. And if you have multiple things coming up, just give whatever's coming up a little label. Now I'd invite you to ask yourself, what's the strongest emotion I'm feeling right now? Just repeat the label of that emotion. And if you don't know, maybe it's actually confusion or just something general like distress. But if you can tell, just focus in on that one emotion. And now what I'd invite you to do is drop out of your head into your body and actually feel the emotion. Right, where do I feel this as a sensation? And maybe it is in your head. Maybe it's a pounding in your head or a tightness in your jaw. Or maybe it's constriction in your throat or a heaviness in your chest or a tightness in your stomach. Or maybe it's just an overall sense of, it might be numbness or discomfort. How is it manifesting for you in your body, this emotion? See if you can be as specific as possible. Let your awareness go there. So just really feeling the sensations of the emotion. Might be heat, or cold, or sharpness, maybe dullness, perhaps tingling, pressure, contraction. Okay, now we want to bring some warmth in. Still allow us to soften a little bit around the emotion if we can. All right, in other words, kind of almost like we're melting around it, so we're holding it a little less tightly. If it's a prickly emotion like anger, you might just imagine that you're giving it like more breathing space. But if it's an emotion like hurt or sadness, you might think of it as like putting a warm blanket around the emotion. Just allowing your body, if it can, just to soften around the tension of the emotion in your body. So as much as feels safe. Can you soften? And then can we soothe and comfort ourselves because it's hard to feel this. And so one way to do that is with some physical touch. See if you can put your hand on the place in your body you're feeling this emotion most strongly. If you don't know, you can actually put just both hands on your heart or some other place. But actually see if you can physically hold the emotion in your body. Use some comforting and soothing and supportive touch. And if it's a more prickly emotion like anger, you can even put like a fist of strength and, get through this and here for you and whatever feels right. Use some physical touch to hold the emotion. Also remember, if at any point it becomes too strong or backdraft arises, you can always just move to the soles of your feet. You can let go of the practice. That may be the wise thing to do. But if you can just stay with the emotion with that sense of soothing and comforting. And also you may want to add some words of support or comfort. Words that you might say to a friend who is feeling something like this. Like, I'm so sorry you're going through this. I'm so sorry this is happening. This is so difficult. I'm here for you. I won't abandon you. And just take this moment by moment. Or if, your instance of suffering is more feelings of inadequacy, you may need to hear words more like, it's okay to be imperfect. You're doing the best you can. So what you say is could be quite different depending on what you're dealing with. So just ask yourself, what do I need to hear right now? Maybe what would a really compassionate person say to me right now? And then after the kind of support and strength that we get from having our own back with compassion, see if you can just allow the emotion to be here. Right, just for this moment. In the future, maybe there's stuff we want to do, absolutely. But right now, this is how we're feeling. Can we allow ourselves to feel as we feel? For this moment at least, no need to fix anything or make it go away or change anything. We just need to be with ourselves with loving, connected presence. Just kind of notice what happens, if anything happens, to the emotion when we give it this warmth and space. And then letting the practice go. Make sure you're feeling yourself here, feet on the floor. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. So those are the basic principles. And if you do this practice, and actually I do have a version of it on my website, what could be really interesting is you kind of stick on the tail of the emotion. And often you'll find, like when we're with ourselves, that other emotions are there as well. Oftentimes, like for instance, under anger, there's often hurt. Or under, fear, there may be sadness. So often if we stick with ourselves as we're feeling the emotion, other emotions will come up or they'll morph or they'll change. And you can just do the same thing. Oh, what am I feeling now? Labeling it. Where am I feeling it? Maybe the same place, maybe different place in my body. Again, you kind of just stick on the trail of it, softening and soothing and allowing. And it's, emotions left on their own, they kind of do their little dance, they rise up, and typically they dissipate. When they don't, it's usually because we're resisting them and fighting them, and they like to get stuck in us. So allowing us to feel, when we allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling, especially with compassion and mindfulness, then it means we aren't resisting, and then the emotions typically don't persist, and then they can start to move through us. And another way of talking about emotional processing, really. We want to process emotion. We want to be with ourselves with space and warmth, mindfulness and compassion. All right, so I've got about 8 minutes left. Maybe first we'll ask if anyone has any questions about that practice, and then we'll open it up again to just more general questions. Does anyone have a question about that practice of working with difficult emotions? Or anyone want to share their experience? You can also do that if you want.
Hello? Okay.
Hi.
I noticed that when I did it, my main feeling was confusion. But then the pictures that you had earlier had like fear, anger, and disgust. But I noticed that it was like more in the disgust area. And I also realized that part of the confusion that I was feeling was because I was feeling fearful and disgusted by a situation.
Yeah.
But it was like, I don't know, it's like I realized that they're not very big emotions in this situation, but they're still there, and it's more of something that I'm just confused about myself. But if I do notice those smaller, tiny emotions in there, do I like do another practice separately for those, or?
So like I said, you could actually keep with the practice. It just depends what you want to do. But when I do the practice, I do this. I think of it as sticking on the trail of whatever's arising. So I might notice there's a little bit of disgust or a little bit of fear, and I'll just be with it. And then what I'll find is so for instance, if you don't want to feel any disgust or fear, you're still going to be feeling the disgust and fear, but instead you don't, in some ways confusion is a way of we don't want to go there, so we just feel confused. But if you think of them almost like it's little energetic arisings in our body, things like disgust and fear, if we don't have a way of processing them, they just stay inside of us, and then they may come back to bite us in some other way. So by being willing to be with them, you can just stick with this practice. Okay, I feel the fear. Okay, can I soften around the fear? It's hard to feel fear. Soothe yourself. Where do you feel it? And then allow it to be there. And then you can also do the same thing with the disgust. It's like, often they lessen. They don't always. Sometimes they get stronger. But it's a way of we have our own back as we're feeling it. And then eventually they will clear out and make some space. So does that make sense? Hopefully.
Yeah, it does.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have anything about that practice, or actually anything? Because we have 5 minutes left, if you like. Yes.
I found during that practice that I was feeling it and stuff, and I was trying to give it compassion and just be with it. And I found, I had a lot of anxiety and fear. But I feel like by the end of the practice that I had a lot of compassion for others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, that often happens when we we open our hearts to ourselves, and it's hard to have your heart open when you're in the grip of fear. Then we can extend that to others.
Yeah, I didn't really have a question, but.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. There's someone up here. Brad?
This is more of a general question, but and I'm not sure if I'll phrase it correctly, but with you having a son on the spectrum, I'm just curious as how this works with people on the spectrum. Because my husband is high functioning, and he has I've a lot of things that work really well for me. He has a lot of resistance to, or just doesn't get it in his brain. Why are you this doesn't make sense? What are So I guess with your experience, what things have you found that are helpful or work a little differently with people on the spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, so every person on the spectrum is totally different, and so my son was always very emotionally connected, but we've used like I used to teach it to him, and he would say, "Mommy, I don't want to feel the pain. You know, get out of that." He was, I kind of resisted self-compassion, but now, I'm not sharing too much. He actually developed OCD as an adolescent on top of the autism, so it was, he was really hurting from these repetitive, obsessive thoughts that he couldn't control them. So what really worked for us is we made him a little script. Like, I wouldn't necessarily use the script, but for him it really worked. So his script would be like, "Tricky brain, I know you're trying to keep me safe, but it's really not helping." And he would say, I am worthy of compassion and care. He would do these scripts. When he started kind of realizing he was autistic, he just imagined people like making fun of him and all this stuff. So we actually taught him a script that had self-compassion embedded in it. His therapist actually had him record it on his iPhone in his own language, and then when it would come up, he would play the little script. So that worked for him. So there's a lot of creative things you can do. But now, if I'm ever upset, he says, "Hey, Mom, give yourself a break." Like, he actually teaches me to be help me be self-compassionate now. So, yeah. Okay. So maybe just to leave you with a closing message, if there are no more questions. One of my favorite sayings about what self-compassion practice is like is the goal of self-compassion practice is simply to be a compassionate mess. What does that mean? Is your goal to be a mess? No. The goal is when the mess of life arises, either like the mess of the world, there's a lot of messiness arising right now, or the mess of our own imperfection, you actually start to shift your goal toward holding the mess with compassion. Because we're always going to be a mess. The world's always going to be a mess. It's always been a mess. We're human beings. Human life is a messy business. But if your goal is to bring compassion to the mess, then what happens when you do that is even more important than what's happening is how am I relating to what's happening? Is my heart open? Am I feeling connected to others? Am I present? In other words, am I full of compassion? And the nice thing is you will never be perfect, but the goal of being a compassionate mess is achievable, right? You actually can. Every moment of messiness or fear or anxiety or failure or shame, whatever, if you just remember that all you have to be is a compassionate mess, then life actually can become very beautiful. The imperfection of life becomes an opportunity to have our hearts open and to feel this loving, connected presence. So thank you all for joining me. I'm out of time. Thank you.
And thank you again, Dr. Neff, for taking the time and being with us. And let's give her one more big round of applause. Thank you. So we have a break, and then we'll begin again at 2:40. And so do what you need to do, and there's some food out there, and then you can come back. So thank you, everybody. There's also a few more books for sale if anybody's interested out there. So.